Hi, my name's not on any birth certificate. I'm not his mother on paper, but I was the one who held him through every fever, every nightmare. 15 years ago, my father dropped off his 5-year-old son at my door like he was handing over a package, and then he vanished. I gave up my youth, my career, my sleep, my life. I raised that boy like he was mine. Because in every way that mattered, he was. But then, he came back, with the cops, pointing fingers, calling me the criminal. Do you know what it's like to be accused of stealing the one person you spent your life saving? And what breaks you isn't the betrayal. It's that no one, not the court, not the system, not even the child you raised, calls you family. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you hearing this? Where are you? Leave a comment. I want to know who's listening, because maybe you've lived this too. Maybe you gave everything and ended up erased. Let me tell you what happened, and why I'll never let them write the ending of our story without me in the room. It was just after 8. I'd kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch, still in my work uniform, the scent of cheap diner grease clinging to my skin. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching, just letting the flickering light fill the room while I stared at the cracks on the ceiling like I did most nights. My shift had been long, tips were lousy, and my feet were screaming. I didn't hear it at first, just a soft knock. Hesitant. Not the kind that demands anything, more like a question. I sat up, heart tapping against my ribs. Nobody ever came by unannounced. I lived in a modest apartment on a quiet street where people minded their business and kept their visits scheduled. I walked to the door, slow and cautious, the hallway light spilling a dull yellow across the floor. Through the peephole, I could see a small figure. I hesitated. Then I unlocked the top deadbolt, then the middle one, then the bottom chain. Habit. And there he was. A child, standing alone. 5, maybe 6 years old. Skinny arms, oversized coat sleeves, a plastic backpack half-zipped hanging from his shoulders. His shoes didn't match. One sneaker, one boot. His hair was matted on one side like he'd been sleeping in a car. He didn't look scared, just waiting. Behind him, halfway hidden in the stairwell shadows, was my father. He didn't move, didn't smile. He didn't even pretend this was normal. I blinked, caught between disbelief and something colder. "Dad?" I said, more question than greeting. He nodded once, tight-lipped. "He's yours now, just for a little while. I need to take care of something." "Take care of what?" I asked, already feeling that ice settle deep in my chest. He waved it off like I'd asked the weather. "Just a few weeks, month, tops." I stepped aside instinctively as the boy brushed past me, not waiting for an invitation. He walked straight in like he belonged there, like he already knew the layout. I looked back at my father, but he was already turning. "Wait," I said. "You can't just leave a kid." "You've always been good with kids," he cut in, already descending the stairs. "Better than your sister, that's for damn sure." And then he was gone. No bag for the kid, no instructions, no phone call to follow, just the creaking of the stairwell and the echo of his boots getting smaller and smaller. I stood there a moment longer, hands still on the doorknob, waiting for something to change. But the hallway light clicked off behind me, and that was it. Inside, the kid was standing by my couch, looking at the TV. No words, no fear, just presence. I closed the door slowly. The click of the lock sounded final. "Do you want water?" I asked. He nodded. In the kitchen, I filled a glass and placed it on the counter. He drank half in one go, then wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his too big coat. Still no talking. I crouched down, trying to meet him where he was. "What's your name?" "Michael," he said, voice small but clear. I swallowed hard. That was my father's middle name. Of course it was. "You hungry?" Another nod. I microwaved the last of my leftovers, sat him at the table, watched him eat like he hadn't in days. I didn't ask any more questions. I couldn't. Not yet. After, I found the old sleeping bag I kept in the closet and laid it out on the floor beside my bed. He crawled in without protest, curling up like he'd done it 100 times before. He didn't ask where his dad went. He didn't ask who I was to him. He just looked up at me and said, "Can you leave the light on?" I nodded. Later that night, I lay in bed, eyes open. The apartment was still, but my mind was racing. I didn't call my father. I didn't call anyone. Who would I even call? There was no manual for this. No return to sender button. Just that little boy, asleep on my floor, breathing softly. I thought about sending him away, about walking him to a shelter, calling CPS, pretending this never happened, but I couldn't, because if I didn't take him, no one else would, and deep down, I knew that. So I stayed, and I kept the light on. I didn't know it then, but that night would cost me 15 years of my life, and almost my name. By sunrise, I was already out of bed, not because I'd slept well, because I hadn't, but because that's what you do when your world changes overnight. You get up, you move, you handle it. The boy, Michael, was still asleep on the floor beside my bed, one tiny foot sticking out of the sleeping bag, sock half off. His breathing was steady, unaware. I stood in the doorway for a second, just watching him. Then I walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge, 3 eggs, half a gallon of milk, mustard, leftover rice in a stained Tupperware. Rent was due in 10 days. My car needed gas. I had work in 2 hours, and now there was a child. I checked my phone. Nothing. No calls, no messages, just silence. That was the thing about my father. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He disappeared like he expected you to fill in the blanks yourself. And I did. That morning, I walked Michael to the nearest elementary school and asked to speak with the front office. The woman behind the glass looked up from her computer like she'd already dealt with 10 problems before 9 a.m. "I need to enroll him," I said, gently pushing Michael forward. She gave me a tight smile. "Great. Do you have his birth certificate, proof of custody, shot records?" I froze. "No, he just got here." Her smile didn't change, but her eyes did. "Unfortunately, we need documentation before we can place him. Do you have any legal guardianship paperwork?" I wanted to scream, "He's 5. What do you want me to do? Leave him on the curb." But instead, I nodded slowly and said, "I'll come back." And I did, again and again. I collected what I could. I wrote down numbers that didn't work. I forged a signature once, careful and neat. It wasn't pride, it was survival. The folder started then, blue plastic, half torn, eventually stuffed with every receipt, form, drawing, and note I'd collect over the years. I didn't know I was building my defense file. I just knew no one else was going to track his life for him. To afford even a chance of making it work, I picked up another shift at the nursing home, then a weekend retail job, then late-night cleaning gigs. My days blurred into punch clocks and name tags. I memorized the smell of bleach, learned which corners the vacuums missed, timed my breaks by when the elderly residents fell asleep. I didn't complain, not out loud. Instead, I tracked every penny. I stopped going out, stopped dating, stopped answering when old friends texted. I packed peanut butter sandwiches, apples, coupons. I watched YouTube tutorials on how to hem pants, clean grout, fix leaky faucets. Love didn't make the rent, but it fueled everything I did. At a clearance bin in Walgreens, I found a lunchbox, blue plastic, a cartoon dog on the front. It cost $4.99. I hesitated, then bought it anyway. At home, I peeled off the barcode and stuck a white label on the front. I wrote Michael in bold block letters, pressing down until the ink dented the surface. That lunchbox went with him every morning. Inside, one sandwich, a juice box, a napkin with a smiley face. I didn't feel like smiling when I drew it, but I did it anyway. One night, a few weeks in, Michael was sitting at the table drawing while I scrubbed the sink. He looked up and said, casual as anything, "Mom, can you help me spell dinosaur?" I dropped the sponge. The word hit me like a punch. He didn't notice. I didn't correct him. I couldn't. It wasn't about the title. It was about what it meant. He'd already decided who I was to him, and I wasn't ready, but that didn't matter. From then on, the label on his lunchbox meant something else. It wasn't just his name. It was mine, too. Every few weeks, he'd ask about his dad. "When's he coming back?" he'd ask, not sad, just curious. I'd answer softly, vaguely. "He's working on something. Maybe soon. I'll let you know if I hear anything." But I never did. And the more I didn't, the more it felt like the truth was curling in around us, tighter and tighter. Eventually, the questions stopped. Not suddenly, just less and less until they disappeared. And when they did, I wasn't relieved. I was terrified. Because by the time he stopped asking when his dad was coming back, I knew the truth I'd been avoiding. My father wasn't gone by accident. Once you accept a truth like that, it settles into your bones. You don't talk about it every day, but it shapes how you stand, how you listen, how you prepare for the worst, even when things are finally going right. By the time Michael turned 15, our life wasn't loud or impressive, but it worked. He was taller than me, already developing that quiet teenage habit of answering with shrugs and half smiles. He kept his grades steady, helped with the trash without being asked, and disappeared into his room with headphones the minute dinner was over. I had one job now: benefits, paid time off, a routine that didn't feel like I was racing the clock every morning. The lunchbox years were long gone. In its place was a battered backpack that smelled faintly of detergent and gym socks, but the habit stayed. I still checked his homework, still left a note on the counter when I worked late, still waited up until I heard his bedroom door close at night. We weren't surviving anymore. We were living. That's why the phone call caught me off guard. It was a weekday afternoon, one of those quiet moments when the apartment feels suspended between school dismissal and dinner. The number on my screen didn't mean anything to me. No name, no warning. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Hello?" I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a man's voice, measured and calm. "Is this Sarah?" "Yes." Another pause. "I'm calling about Michael." My hand tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" He exhaled softly, like the question amused him. "It's your father." My body reacted before my mind did. A wave of heat rushed up my neck. My stomach dropped. I sat down without meaning to. He sounded good. That was the first thing I noticed. Not sick, not desperate, comfortable. We agreed to meet in a public parking lot near a grocery store. I told myself it was for safety. Truth was, I didn't want him anywhere near my home. When he stepped out of his car, I barely recognized him. Clean haircut, crisp button down, new shoes. He looked like a man who had been doing just fine without us. He smiled like we were picking up a conversation from last week. "You look well," he said. I didn't answer that. I asked why he was back. He waved a hand lightly. "I've been thinking. It felt like the right time." No apology, no acknowledgement of the years he missed. Just timing. He asked about Michael, how tall he was now, what grade he was in. He guessed wrong on both, then corrected himself too quickly. His concerns sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced the lines in the mirror. Then the questions changed. "When did you enroll him in school? Who handled his medical care? Did you ever file for guardianship?" They came one after another, casual on the surface, sharp underneath. He didn't ask if Michael cried when he left. He didn't ask what bedtime stories he liked, or what scared him, Or who taught him how to ride a bike? He asked about paperwork. I just want to make sure everything was done right, he said, smiling as he said it. That smile stayed with me long after we parted. We didn't argue. We didn't raise our voices. He said he'd be in touch. I watched him walk back to his car, polished and unhurried. Driving home, I replayed the early years in my head. The silence, the empty inbox, the calls that never came, the receipts I'd saved without knowing why, the folder tucked away in my drawer. For the first time, I saw it clearly. I hadn't just raised a child. I'd documented his abandonment one day at a time. That night, I told Michael his grandfather had reached out. I kept my voice even. He nodded, said, "Okay," and went back to his room. He didn't ask questions. That scared me more than anything else. I told myself my father just wanted answers. But deep down, I knew he was counting something. The next few days moved like water dripping from a leaky faucet. Slow, quiet, and hard to ignore. I went through the motions, made coffee, checked Michael's homework, folded laundry that had been sitting in the basket for days. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, I was watching, listening, waiting for a ripple to become a wave. He came home from school like normal, head buried in his phone, earbuds in, shoes kicked off in the same corner I always told him to move them from. We had dinner. I asked about his classes. He gave short, vague answers like always, but every time the phone buzzed, I looked at it twice. Every time I walked past the window, I pulled the curtain back just an inch. That calm feeling I had built over the years had thinned into something brittle. It started small. A woman on the second floor, someone who usually gave me a friendly nod at the mailbox, suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. At first, I chalked it up to a bad day, but then another neighbor asked, out of nowhere, "Is he really yours?" Her tone was light, but her eyes weren't. I knew what that meant. Someone had been talking. My father wasn't just back. He was planting doubt before he planted his feet. The following Tuesday morning, I was halfway through my grocery list when I decided to skip the last aisle. Something felt off. I wanted to be home, just to be near the front door. I didn't know why, I just did. Back at the apartment, I put the milk in the fridge, the cereal in the cupboard, and I was about to start chopping vegetables for dinner when someone knocked. 3 sharp raps. Mid-morning, no delivery expected. I opened the door a few inches, the chain still on. 2 people stood there, mid-30s maybe, both in plain clothes. Not police, not dressed up either. The woman spoke first. "Ms. Carter?" I nodded and she held up a badge. "We're with Child Protective Services. We'd like to talk, if that's okay." It wasn't okay, not even a little. But I unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. They stepped inside politely, but it still felt like an invasion. They didn't sit down, just stood near the kitchen island, flipping open a folder. The man, quiet until now, began with carefully chosen words. "There's been a report. We're here to follow up. This isn't an accusation, it's a concern." Concern. That word landed like a punch, wrapped in cotton. They asked questions, not aggressive, just relentless. Who had legal custody? Did I have the original birth certificate? Who took him to the doctor? What school was he in? Was he up to date on vaccinations? I answered everything, truthfully. But the air got thicker with every sentence. I'd been raising this child for 15 years, not as a babysitter, not as a sister. As his mother in every way that mattered, but not on paper. They took notes, nodded, asked to see his room. I showed them. It was clean, lived in, full of the kind of mess that tells you a kid actually lives there. Wrinkled hoodie on the floor, half-eaten bag of chips on the desk, a poster of a band I'd never heard of on the wall. They didn't smile. They didn't frown. They just wrote things down. Then came the part I wasn't ready for. "We'd like to speak with Michael," the woman said gently. Not here, at school. Why? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Just routine, she replied. It helps us get a sense of his environment. It's not punitive. I nodded, because what else could I do? After they left, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at my own hands like they belonged to someone else. I had been through exhaustion, through doubt, through sacrifice. But this was something new. A threat that didn't wear a face or raise its voice. It wore politeness. It held a clipboard. And it had access. This wasn't about me being a good person, or a bad one. It wasn't even about Michael's well-being, not really. It was about forms, boxes that weren't checked, names that didn't match, dates that couldn't be proven. It was about the kind of power you don't see until it's sitting on your couch with a badge and a pleasant smile. Later that evening, I looked across the room and saw Michael's backpack slumped by the door. I thought about how many years I'd packed his lunch, how many nights I'd checked his fever, how many mornings I'd driven him to school in the rain. None of that was written down. None of it, apparently, counted. They said they were just asking questions. But I knew then that answers wouldn't be enough. The sentence kept echoing in my head long after the door closed behind them. They said they were just asking questions, but I knew then that answers wouldn't be enough. It felt like standing on the edge of something I couldn't see, only feel, the way the air shifts before a storm breaks. I went to work the next morning because routine was the only thing I had left that felt solid. I answered emails. I smiled when spoken to. I kept my phone face up on the desk, volume turned all the way up, like I was waiting for a heart monitor to beep. Every unfamiliar number made my stomach clench. Every minute without a call felt like a test I didn't know how to study for. I told myself this was procedural, temporary, something that could be fixed with the right documents, the right explanation, the right calm tone. I had survived harder things than paperwork. I had survived exhaustion, loneliness, years of doing the work no one saw. Surely this would bend, too. The call came just after noon. The school administrator spoke gently, the way people do when they're trying to keep control of a situation that's already slipping. She asked if I could come down to the office to clarify a few things. She didn't say Michael's name at first. That omission hit harder than if she had. I didn't explain anything at work. I grabbed my keys, left my badge on the desk, and drove with both hands tight on the steering wheel, my thoughts racing ahead of the car. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, my hands were shaking. They took me into a small office I'd never been in before, fluorescent lights, a round table, 2 chairs already occupied. One of the CPS workers from my apartment sat there with a folder, her expression neutral to the point of being unreadable. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She said the word carefully, like she was handing me something fragile. Kidnapping. It landed in the room and stayed there. For a moment, everything went quiet, not peaceful, empty, like someone had erased 15 years with a single stroke. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. My mind simply stopped, as if it couldn't process a reality where that word belonged anywhere near my life. When I found my voice again, it came out too fast. I explained how he was left, how no one came back, how there were no calls, no money, no instructions. I slowed myself down, corrected details, tried to sound reasonable. I realized with a sick drop in my chest that I sounded like someone making excuses even though I was telling the truth. They listened, they wrote, they didn't react. That was the cruelest part, the neutrality. Pain reduced to notes on a page. They said they needed to place Michael temporarily while things were sorted out. Temporary, they assured me. A word meant to soothe, but it didn't sound temporary when it came from their mouths. It sounded like a door closing softly, the kind that locks behind you without a sound. I asked when I could see him. No one gave me a date. They let me see him briefly, out by the parking lot. He looked confused, more annoyed than scared, like a teenager pulled out of class for no good reason. I told him this was a mistake, that adults sometimes mess things up, that I'd fix it. He nodded because he trusted me. That trust sat heavier than anything I'd ever carried. As they walked him toward another car, I realized I was holding something in my hands. His old lunchbox. I didn't remember picking it up. The handle was worn, the corners bent from years of being shoved into backpacks and lockers. A CPS worker noticed and said gently, "You won't be needing that." The sentence broke something open in me that the accusation hadn't touched. After everyone left, I sat in my car long after the parking lot emptied. The sun shifted, shadows stretched. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't know where my child was going to sleep that night. That was when I understood something I'd never wanted to believe. Love doesn't protect you from the system. It doesn't count as proof. It doesn't stop a file from being opened or a child from being taken. They took him without handcuffs, but it felt exactly like an arrest. I stayed in the parking lot for hours, engine off, windows cracked. I couldn't bring myself to go home, not yet. The idea of walking into that apartment without hearing his voice, without seeing his shoes by the door or his backpack slumped on the couch, it felt unbearable. But eventually the sun dipped behind the building. Shadows crawled across the pavement. So I drove. The apartment looked exactly the same, but everything had shifted. The silence inside wasn't peaceful. It was piercing, too still, too tidy. His bed was made from the morning, but it felt like someone had vacuumed the life out of the room. The sink held no dishes. There were no crumbs under the table. It was the kind of quiet that made you doubt anything had ever really happened here. I kept walking past his room, like maybe if I turned fast enough, I'd catch him sitting there, earbuds in, pretending not to hear me. But every time the space was as empty as my chest. 2 days later, I sat across from a legal aid attorney in a cramped office above a strip mall. Her desk was stacked with files and plastic bins labeled in permanent marker. She was kind but methodical. She asked questions I hadn't prepared for: proof of financial support, documentation of medical appointments, school records, anything with both our names on it. I opened my purse and pulled out a few wrinkled papers: a school photo order form, a receipt from a dentist visit, his immunization card, unsigned. She looked through them carefully, not judging, just checking boxes I didn't know existed. "You've been raising him alone all these years?" she asked gently. I nodded. The weight of the truth nearly knocked the wind out of me. "Did you ever file for guardianship?" "No," I said. My voice cracked. "I didn't think I had to." She didn't say anything for a moment, just flipped a page, then looked up. In the eyes of the court, you're not listed as anything. Not mother, not stepmother, not legal guardian. Just a woman who fed him, clothed him, stayed up through his fevers, taught him how to tie his shoes and file taxes. But legally, I was a ghost. I left the office with a list of things to gather and a timeline I couldn't hold on to. The ground under my feet didn't feel stable anymore. It felt like sand. When I got home, I sat in front of the mirror in the bathroom and stared at the woman looking back at me. Her eyes were rimmed red. Her face looked older than it should have. Her mouth didn't move. I didn't recognize her. I blamed her, not for raising him, but for doing it blindly, for assuming that love was a shield, for believing that being there was enough. I almost gave up. Almost. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, I remembered something small. Months ago, a neighbor had said, "You should really make sure you've got the official papers on all that." I had laughed, brushing it off like a joke. Now it felt like a warning I'd ignored, like a flare fired into the air that I never saw. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I pulled out every box, every drawer, every bag tucked away in the back of the closet. I found photos, birthday parties, school recitals, Saturday mornings in pajamas. I found notes from teachers, old report cards, a Valentine's card with "To Mom" scribbled in awkward boy handwriting. Every scrap of paper became a brick in a wall I didn't know I'd been building. For years, I'd been documenting our life, not for proof, but out of pride, out of habit. Now I was collecting evidence. I wasn't trying to win revenge. I was trying to bring the truth to light, because the people telling this story without me didn't know him. They didn't know what we'd survived. They didn't know me. I sat down at the kitchen table, sorting everything into folders: medical, school, financial, personal. I labeled them with sticky notes and tucked them into an old tote bag. There was no court date yet, no official notice, but I knew, somewhere behind closed doors, someone was making decisions. And I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I don't know if any of it will be enough. I don't know how long it will take or who will stand against me. But I know one thing for certain: I am not letting them write the ending of this story without me in the room. I was never invited to the trial, but I'm showing up anyway. He was right in front of me, but it felt like watching a memory that didn't know my name anymore. He stood by the wall, hands tucked into the pocket of his hoodie. His favorite kind, zip-up, sleeves too long. Only now he filled out the frame in a way that startled me. 15 years had stretched him tall. His jaw was sharper, voice lower. But his eyes held that same tired kindness I used to see when he curled into my side after a nightmare. Except today, they were distant. Not blank, not cold, just careful. He said, "Hi," like someone greeting a substitute teacher. Not mom, not even by my name. Just a flat, one-syllable offering, shaped more by politeness than recognition. Behind me, the visitation supervisor cleared her throat and handed over a paper with printed bullet points. You can talk about food, school, hobbies. No legal discussion. If anything starts to escalate, I'll intervene. She smiled like she was giving me a favor, not a list of boundaries. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give them a reason to shorten the visit. We only had 45 minutes. Silas sat on the far side of the table, his legs bouncing under the chair. That used to mean excitement. Now it just looked like nerves. I started small. "Still listening to Death Cab?" He shrugged. "Sometimes." I tried a gentle smile. "Remember that time we drove to Sacramento just to hear them live, and the power cut out mid-set?" He blinked, then gave a tight laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Sort of." I swallowed. The silence sat between us like a glass wall I couldn't find the door to. "I brought you something," I said, pulling a small wrapped package from my tote. "Just a sketchbook. You always liked—" He cut in, quiet but firm. "They said I couldn't take anything back with me." Right. Of course they did. I placed the package on the edge of the table anyway. "It's okay. Just open it here then." He didn't move. "I miss you," I said. It came out softer than I meant, like a draft under the door. "Every day." He looked down, then sideways. Not at me. At the supervisor. She was pretending not to watch, but we both knew better. The seconds crawled. "I know they're not telling you the whole truth," I whispered, leaning in, breaking the rules because what else did I have to lose? "You know me, Silas. You know how we—" He stiffened, didn't look up, but I saw his jaw clench. I softened my voice. "You can always call me. Any time. No matter what they say." He stood up when they called time. No hug. No look back. The door closed behind him with a click I felt in my teeth. I stayed seated. Not because I had to, but because standing would have broken something inside me I wasn't ready to face. Back in the parking lot, I didn't sob. I just let the tears fall, slow and quiet, like they'd waited all day for privacy. I watched the sun dip behind the courthouse and remembered the first birthday cake I ever made him. He was 6. We didn't have much then, so I baked with what I had. Boxed mix, applesauce instead of eggs, frosting made from powdered sugar and orange juice. He told me it was the best cake in the world. I'd kept every birthday card he made me. Crayon-drawn hearts. Misspelled love. Handprints turned into turkeys. Now I wasn't even allowed to say his name in a sentence with the word home. That night, I walked through the house and paused at the shelf where his baby photo always sat. Him wrapped in a faded green blanket, barely 5, holding a Lego piece in one hand and a juice box in the other. But the frame was gone. I opened drawers, looked under old files. Nothing. Someone took it, or made sure I thought they had. I sat on the floor, heart pounding in my throat, staring at the empty space like it had cursed the wall. They weren't just trying to remove me from his life. They were erasing me from his past. I stayed there for an hour. Then I got up. I went to the kitchen, opened the cabinet above the sink, and pulled down the shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside, receipts from doctor visits, copies of school forms, old report cards, birthday photos, a library card with his name and mine on the signature line, a drawing of us, stick-figured and smiling, taped together with years of glue and Scotch tape. I took out a sheet of paper, and I started writing, not to beg, not to vent, to explain, to document, to make them see what I already knew, that love may not have paperwork, but I had proof that it was real. I wrote about the lunches I packed, the night fevers I cooled with damp towels, the calls from school I took when he was too anxious to speak. I wrote about Halloween costumes sewn by hand and the way he always asked me to sit in the front row for band concerts, even when he pretended it embarrassed him. I clipped everything together, labeled each section. At the front, I placed one photo. Me, 15 years younger, standing on that same porch where it all began, holding Silas in one arm, his little bag at my feet, his face turned toward mine, grinning like the whole world lived inside that moment. I raised him once without permission. This time, I'll fight with proof. They thought the court hearing would break me. They didn't know what I brought with me. That morning, I got dressed like I was heading into war. Quiet war, the kind that doesn't ask for attention. Slacks, blouse, low heels, hair tied back, no makeup beyond chapstick. I didn't want to look like someone putting on a show. I wanted to look like someone who had nothing to hide. The folder sat beside me on the passenger seat as I drove to the courthouse. I'd triple-checked it the night before. It held every scrap of who I'd been for Silas. Photos, school records, notes from teachers, receipts, the letter to the judge, and one picture of me holding him at 5 years old. When I walked into that courtroom, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Dorian sat on the far side of the room, next to a man in a suit too expensive for the truth. His posture was perfect, relaxed even. I hadn't seen him since that first ambush visit, and now here he was, playing calm and clean like 15 years hadn't gone missing. Silas wasn't in the room. Part of me was relieved. The other part ached. The judge looked worn, the way people do when they've heard too many lies to get surprised anymore. His voice was gravel and authority. Let's begin. Dorian's lawyer went first. She's emotionally unstable, not a relative. She manipulated the child and obstructed communication between father and son. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I sat still and stared straight ahead. Then it was my turn. My attorney stood, steady and clear. My client raised Silas from the age of 5. She fed him, clothed him, educated him, and loved him through every year his father was gone. We have documents to support her role, and more importantly, we have consistency. I stood and opened the folder. I pulled out pictures, birthday cakes, report cards, permission slips with my signature, emergency contact forms, the field trip photo where I held Silas's jacket while he ran across a grassy field, grinning. I didn't just raise him, I said quietly. I built his life one day at a time. The judge didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just wrote something down. Then Dorian's lawyer stood again. He pulled a stapled document from his briefcase. She forged this. It landed like a punch. He passed it to the clerk, who brought it to the judge. My attorney took one look and turned to me, eyebrows furrowed. I shook my head. I'd never seen that paper before in my life. It was a letter supposedly from a school nurse, signed by me and backdated to a time when I hadn't even known the nurse's name. The judge leaned in. "This your signature?" "No," I said firmly, but I could hear the shift in the room. Doubt enters quietly, like cold air through a cracked window. The judge flipped pages. "The date doesn't align with enrollment records." I froze. This could bury me. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because doubt was a poison that didn't need much to spread. And then, a voice rang from the back of the courtroom. "I have something to say." Everyone turned. It was Callista, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She wore her work scrubs, name tag still clipped to her chest. She held a manila envelope in both hands, like it might burn her fingers. She walked to the front, shaking. "He asked me to lie," she said, voice trembling. "He paid me to sign some things, told me she was dangerous, said it was for the boy's safety." She looked straight at the judge. "I didn't know the truth, but I know what I did was wrong." The courtroom was dead quiet. My hands gripped the edge of the table. I could feel my attorney exhale beside me. Callista handed over the envelope. The judge opened it. It was more documents, copies of the same kind of fake file that had just been introduced. Dorian didn't say a word. He stared ahead, jaw tight. Then the judge cleared his throat. "I have a letter here that was submitted under seal, from Silas." He paused. "He asked us not to read it aloud, but under the circumstances, I believe it matters." I stopped breathing. The judge began. "She's the only person who ever showed up for me. If she's not my family, then I don't want one." A sound escaped my throat, half sob, half relief. The judge set the paper down. "This isn't just a custody issue," he said slowly. "This is a story of neglect by a father who chose abandonment over parenting. Ms. Monroe, I'm granting you temporary guardianship, pending further evaluation." The gavel fell. It echoed in my bones. As I walked out of that courtroom, I wasn't smiling. I was too tired, too cracked open. But I was whole again. They gave me time. Now I need to prove I still deserve him. The air in the house feels too still. It's not the hush of peace. It's the quiet that settles after something has shattered and you've swept the glass, but your hands still sting. I sit at the kitchen table. The coffee in front of me is cold. I don't warm it. Silas is upstairs, asleep in the same room he left months ago. School starts next week. I folded his new uniform last night and set it on the edge of the bed. He didn't say much, just nodded and gave a soft "thanks" before climbing under the covers. He hasn't called me Mom. He hasn't called me anything, really. But he came home. The clock ticks louder than it should, and the hum of the refrigerator fills the spaces where conversation used to live. The calm should feel like relief. Instead, it feels like aftermath. I've gotten so used to fighting that the silence confuses me. It's late morning when the knock comes. Not a pounding, just 2 soft taps. I look through the peephole and freeze. Dorian. He stands alone, no legal aid, no sheriff, no slick words this time, just him. His face is drawn, thinner than I remember. He holds something, an envelope maybe. For a second, I think he might try to speak, but he doesn't. He just holds it out. I take it. Our fingers don't touch. He turns around and walks down the path without looking back. I close the door behind me and lock it. Then I stare at the envelope like it might burn through the counter. Inside is a photo. I'm holding Silas, maybe 6 years old, in the backyard. His hair was longer then, and his smile was missing one front tooth. I'm mid-laugh. Someone must have taken it without me noticing. Taped to the back is a sticky note. He deserved better. So did you. No signature, no date, no explanation. It's not redemption, not really, but something in me softens, then tightens again. I'll never understand why he came back. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was cowardice, disguised as closure. I won't waste time trying to unpack him anymore. That door closed the moment he left the boy he never learned to love. Later that afternoon, while putting away laundry in the hallway closet, I open a drawer that hasn't been touched in years. Underneath some faded holiday cards and dried-up markers, I find it. A crumpled piece of paper, construction blue, bent at the corners, a drawing, stick figures, one big, one small, holding hands. The taller one has brown lines for hair, glasses sketched over a round face. Labeled in large, uneven handwriting, Mom. I remember the day he drew it. He was maybe 7. He'd brought it to me, proud and shy at the same time. I'd taped it to the fridge for a year until it faded, and then tucked it away, too afraid to throw it out, too fragile to display. Today, I frame it, not out of nostalgia, but out of truth. I hang it on the wall near the door where sunlight hits in the afternoon, right next to the photo Dorian gave me. Both versions of us, then and now, fragile and fierce, whole and cracked. I don't know what comes next. Maybe Dorian will try again. Maybe another court date, another wave of accusations. But this time, I'm not bracing for it. I'm just living. I make breakfast, I fold laundry, I check homework. I remind Silas to brush his teeth. I tell him goodnight, even when he doesn't say it back. And I wait, patiently. Not for a moment or a word, but for the shape of safety to grow between us again. I've learned something in all of this. Love doesn't vanish when trust gets broken. It gets quiet. It waits, like breath held underwater, until it's safe to rise. So, if you're out there, sitting in your own quiet kitchen, coffee gone cold, wondering if it was worth it, maybe you've been the one holding the family together while they tear you apart. Maybe you gave your best years to someone who never looked back. Maybe you lost more than you ever said out loud. But I see you. I know what that costs. You're not invisible. And you don't owe anyone your silence. If love made me a mother, then truth made me whole.